Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us for the first live event of the year for 2022. So thank you so much for your time today. My name is Anna Maria Gibb and I'm the Senior Product Manager here at PracticeHub. And a big key part of my role involves ensuring that PracticeHub policies and procedures reflect the ever-changing needs of healthcare practices and the requirements. So today we're going to be very ambitious and we're going to talk about 6 policies, but they all relate to financial management. And we've recently added these to our suite of policies and procedures that we provide to our clients. So if you are a PracticeHub client, these should already be in your manual. If you're not with PracticeHub, please have a chat to us about how you can access these policies and all the other ones that form part of the PracticeHub content. So, as always, before we actually look at the policies in detail, I think it's helpful to have an overview of why we have policies and procedures and how to make them relevant and useful to your practice. And in my view, there's 3 things that a policy and procedure needs to be, and that is meaningful, easily understood, and followed. So those key things will mean that that documentation that you're creating or using will actually add value to your organisation. So first of all, when you're developing a policy, it really should cover why the policy is required, why you are doing what you do, and also why it's important as well, the level of importance of the policy. Now, when I think about the reasons for having a policy, why we do what we do, there are probably 4 key areas that I think of. The first is compliance. So whether it's with legislation, whether it's with regulations, standards, guidelines, and so on. And so a good example of that is always privacy. So there's legislation around privacy, the standards cover privacy, and so on. So there are many compliance aspects to privacy, having a privacy policy. The second one is around patient safety. Are we implementing this policy because it is related to enhancing or making sure patients are safe as well? And so, of course, things like that would be infection control, recalls, cold chain management. Another reason for having a policy is risk minimisation. If we document why we're doing these things and how they should be done, are we minimising the risk to our practice or to our organisation? And risk really, I think, always covers 3 key areas, and that is business risk, clinical risk, and work health and safety risk. So kind of applying, is there a risk that falls into one of those 3 buckets? Then we probably need a policy around how we manage that. And lastly, the final one I always think of is around operational excellence. And as practice owners or practice managers, you probably have a fairly good idea of how you want things to be done, the level of quality that you want, how things should be done consistently to a high standard. So I always think that those policies relate to operational excellence. And that involves who has certain roles, who is responsible for data breaches, who's responsible for infection control, and what do those roles and responsibilities look like as well. It also promotes efficiency. And then moving on to procedures. Procedures are really the, who does it, when does it get done, and how does it get done? It's very much the actual sort of nitty-gritty of how do we actually put this policy, why we do what we do, into action as well. And the third thing that I really like to incorporate into policies and procedures are references and resources. So links to standards, links to fact sheets, those sorts of things, articles and case studies, because they can make the content much more relatable to the reader. And so it helps them to understand why they're doing what they're doing and how that process needs to work. It's also really important that these policies and procedures don't live in a bubble. They tend to cross-reference other policies as well in your organisation. So just a bit of background on when you're thinking about developing your policies or procedures, or when you're reviewing them, have these sort of thoughts top of mind as you're reviewing your policies and procedures. So You've been looking at our PracticeHub dashboard here, where you can see the alerts for someone in a manager or administrator role. And you can see that we have a number of applications, but our policies and procedures live here in the manual. So today I'm going to talk to you about financial management policies and procedures, covering these 6 different areas. Now I can see we've got a question here. Do we need any specialised knowledge to customise these policies for your practice? Definitely, the knowledge you have is your experience of how you do things in your practice. When it comes to actually customising content, in PracticeHub, you can certainly call on our support team and we can do that with you as well. There's also a lot of help, sort of walkthroughs and tool tips and things like that to help you understand how to manage the process. And of course, you know, anything relating to financial management, always speak to your accountant or other specialist people that you use in your organisation to give you direction around your financial management activities as well. All right, so really, let's start with the financial reporting one. And you can see in the introduction here, we talk about the purpose of these policies and procedures. And really, it's ensuring that the practice resources are used efficiently and effectively, to clarify the roles and authority and responsibilities for these activities, and to make sure that they can protect the practice owners, the contractors and employees from financial risks as well. I think the other important part is around having consistency. Having documented policies and procedures is really good for handover, for training of new staff if you have this information available, or if key personnel are unavailable. So one of the policies relates to payroll. And, you know, what if, you know, 2 of you are required to authenticate the payroll process, 1 person is away, you've got some clear documentation for whoever can step in for them as well. I think it's also important to highlight that having these sorts of policies and procedures can be really useful for reducing the risk of fraud. So fraud often starts with sort of small amounts, small activities, and then if that is successful, continues to grow. So I think having these sorts of policies and procedures in place is really useful to reduce that risk. All right, now this page may look a little busy. For those of you who have PracticeHub, you'll know that, you know, the side panel over here on the right tells you around, you know, who needs to sign off, how often do we need to review this policy, and of course there's an audit trail of the changes. But the main content is over here on the left-hand side. So with financial reporting, it's generally needed for compliance, for accounting purposes, planning, budgeting, those sorts of things. So we've got our policy here, we've got our procedures where you can see we've highlighted, it's very important to sort of define which role is responsible for this. We have a reference here to what the ATO requires, and you've got the link there to their website. And following on from that, and this is the table that you could customise for your practice, different types of reports that are required. So a billings report, billings by practitioner, billing source, so what's coming from bulk billing, private fees, DVA, and so on. Receipted items versus your billings, so income versus billings. Debtors, very important, and we do have a debtors policy coming up. And then things that, and this is information you're probably going to extract from your practice management system, but these other reports around profit and loss balance sheet and those sorts of things will come out of your accounting software. So it's important to define, you know, who is responsible for extracting or developing these reports, who's going to look at them, and where are you storing them, and what are you actually going to do with these. And based on your individual practices, there may well be other reports that you want to extract as well to give you a clear understanding of the financial position of your business. All right, so let's have a look at the next one, which is around financial delegation and authorization. So again, we have our policy, why are we doing this, and the procedure. So we understand that we need to be clear about who can do what. These delegations are also included in the position descriptions. So if it were me running this site, I would link this policy to the policy that has the position descriptions and make sure that the various position descriptions talk about delegation and authorization as well. Once again, we've got our table here. So what is the activity, delegation, and are there any limits? So just in here, we've included up the top things relating to legal documents, practice owner and director, and it's any of these items. But moving on to more of the day-to-day activities in your business, purchasing goods and services, using petty cash, payroll, practitioner payments, funds transfer, approving invoices, etc. You can see what we've done is, you probably already have this perhaps unofficially or implicitly in place, but it's really useful to document these things for clarity, and so there can be no excuses, and it certainly makes it a lot easier when you're doing handover to different staff. So for example, approving invoices here, we can see that the practice manager and the nurse manager can approve invoices up to $1,000. And again, what you would do if you had this policy is review those amounts and say, okay, I'm comfortable with that, or no, I actually need to update that. Maybe I'm only happy with 500, maybe I'm happy with 2,000. And then anything above the amount you have here goes to the business owner or director for approval. So it's important to think through these things, and particularly as managers and owners, what are you comfortable with, and making it clear to everybody what the process is as well. All right, so that was financial delegation and authorization. Next policy I'm going to show you is about petty cash. Now on this screen, you've got these red banners, and I'll talk about those in just a moment. So petty cash, one of those things really, I tend to think, how much is the petty cash float? That's what you could have in here. Who can use it? What can it be used for? How is it reconciled? How often? And what happens with discrepancies? So somebody has spent some money, there's no receipt. How are you going to handle that discrepancy? What is the process? So with the petty cash one, those are the sorts of things that would be in your procedure. And you can see here discussion about discrepancies, who's responsible, what can it be used for, retaining documentation, that sort of thing. Now, of course, these banners, one of the great challenges I think a lot of organisations have is, how do you get your team to sign off that they've read and understood their policies, and that you in fact have an audit trail proving that they have signed off on them. So within PracticeHub, you can do all of that in the manual, and it's very simple. Basically, you assign the roles that you think need to sign off on this policy. And anytime you save and publish a new version, and you need to notify people about it, that you want them to sign off, they will receive a notification. And when they go into the policy itself, they'll see these banners. You're required to read this as part of your induction. I, whoever they are, have read and understood and agree to comply. And they simply click on confirm. And now you as the manager or owner have an audit trail that that person on this date and time has signed off on this policy. Okay. So that was petty cash. Conscious of time, moving along. The next one, probably same but different to petty cash, but this is if you have business debit or credit cards. And I think really, once again, who has the card, what can it be used for, who reconciles it, how often, how are discrepancies managed? So those are the kinds of things that if you are giving staff a debit or credit card for the business, then it's important to have those things in place. What is acceptable use of the card or of those funds? What happens if there are discrepancies and that sort of thing? So really useful to have that information. Now I can see we have a question. Does this cover taxation? So I guess in a word, no. As I said up front, it's really important that you talk to your financial advisors, accountants in that space. These are very much around the processes in your business. It's not about how you actually manage the finances themselves. All right, a topic that I think I see coming up quite a lot in a lot of the forums is around debt collection. And it is quite tricky, and I know it's quite a frustrating and challenging activity, collecting unpaid fees. But once again, I think, you know, being clear, as it says here, our practice requests payment of patient fees at the time of consultation. So that is made clear up front. But I think it's important to document where are there instances where, you know, under what circumstances could you raise an invoice instead of payment at the time? Who is responsible for reporting, monitoring and following up the debts that are due? And what are the steps for those follow-ups? So, you know, we've got a table down here where we've got a draft debt collection review schedule. So, you know, after 30 days, we call, if to 60 days, we phone and we send a letter and so on. And, you know, if you have late fees or that sort of thing, what are they as well? And, you know, things like at what point might you call in a debt collector? Is there a limit? Is there an amount below which you wouldn't, an amount above which you would call a debt collector? So these are the sorts of things. Now, the other thing, of course, is we do reference the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission's debt collection guidelines. So again, a useful resource to give you that sense of, okay, we want to do this. We've got a resource here. We can confirm that what we're doing it does comply with what the requirements are. Okay. And our last one is around payroll management. Now, I do see we have a question here. Do the policies take into account if you have cloud-based accounting systems? I tend to think that essentially, really, you would customize these policies to reflect the system that you use. And the beauty of this is that with something like PracticeHub, you can put links into to videos, you can put links, you can put in screenshots. So if you use Xero and there's a certain process you need to follow, you can actually make up a guide and put it in here with screenshots so that anyone new to the organisation, or if it's something you don't do terribly often, you've got a reference to go through and be able to easily see the process that needs to be followed. So really, in terms of your accounting system, it's really up to you how specific you want to make it within the policies and procedures. Okie doke. So this one on payroll management. So it's very simple. You know, one of the things we know from the ATO is about record keeping. So, you know, timesheets, those sorts of things. How do you manage those? Who puts the information into the accounting software? You know, how are they processed? And of course, that will link back to your financial delegation and authorization policy as well. You know, who is doing the payroll, who is authorized to make those payments as well. So, you know, very simple in here once again, who has that responsibility, what's required, and so on. And of course, this is an area where there's a lot of different information available. So we have got quite a number of links to organisations like Fair Work and the ATO as well. All right, so that has been a quick trip through our new financial management policies and procedures. I hope that's given you food for thought. As I said, if you're a PracticeHub customer, please go in and have a look at them in more detail and start to think about, you know, how you can refine them, I guess, for your practice. Now, what next? Next steps. If you are not a PracticeHub customer, the best way to get more information is to book a demonstration. It's a one-on-one demonstration with one of our consultants. So they'll be talking just with you and talking about your own practice's needs as well. If you are with PracticeHub and you want more information about customising those policies or any other aspect of the platform, please contact our lovely support team. And that's probably it for today's session, except to remind you that next week we are running a webinar on what I think is one of the hottest of hot topics, and that is human resource management. And we'll be covering recruitment and also talking about employment hot topics. And with all the change and challenges we've been through, I think there's going to be some really good information from our expert speakers on that topic next week. And join us again next month for one of these live events where we'll be talking about continuity of care and clinical handover. Thanks for your time. See you next time.